These are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. As I read this passage from John, which we hear on the second Sunday of Easter every year, I'm again not struck by Thomas's disbelief. This is the evening of the resurrection at the beginning of our passage. Up until this point, the Gospels tell us only the women have seen Jesus and have run to tell the disciples about his resurrection. The disciples are locked away, fearing for their lives, lest they be accused and arrested for stealing Jesus' body. The sealed tomb is empty, and they're having to believe women. The first preachers of the resurrection wouldn't have been allowed to give testimony in legal matters. So the patriarchy has the disciples questioning their word. They're scared, and Jesus appears to them. For whatever reason, Thomas isn't with them. When they confirm to Thomas the women's testimony, Thomas replies, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." This has gotten Thomas the moniker Doubting Thomas. But John doesn't tell us that Thomas doubts any more than the rest of the 11. They have already seen Jesus' nailed hands and seen where the spear pierced his side. They believed because they saw. Thomas is only asking for as much as everyone else. As much as the women at the tomb, as much as the 11 disciples has seen. He wants to see the Lord, wants to know with his own eyes and hands that Jesus is risen from the dead. So as we hear this passage again, I am again not struck by Thomas' disbelief. These signs are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. As we're reading through the 1619 Project, we're all encountering some really big feelings. There's shock at what parts of history aren't in standard curricula. There's heartbreak at the ongoing impact and legacy of American race-based inheritable chattel slavery. There's regular wondering where was, is, has been God through all of this, especially with the church's role ranging from silent to endorsing and defending this kind of systemic racism for so much of our history. There's despair at the human condition, which the church would name as sin. How can we have done all this? And can anything be done now? Shock, heartbreak, wondering, despair. These probably aren't unlike the feelings that all 11 disciples were feeling when Jesus was killed. He said he'd come back. He said that he'd be raised from the dead. But dead people don't come back to life. The disciples knew that to be true, even after Jesus raised Lazarus. Our technology may have advanced by leaps and bounds, but human understanding of the finality of death really hasn't changed that much in the last 2 millennia. In their shock, wondering, heartbreak, and despair, Jesus comes through a locked door and shows them the realities of his body. Jesus comes through a locked door and blesses them with peace. So this year, as we hear this passage, I'm not struck by Thomas's inquisitiveness, but by his absence and the role of the community in sharing the good news of Jesus, the resurrected Christ. Where was Thomas? We don't know, but undoubtedly he too was feeling scared, shocked, heartbroken, wondering, and despair. When he's back with the group, he hears the good news that Jesus has been raised from the dead. But it takes another week before he's with them again, and Jesus appears to them all. When Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe," I don't think that's an admonition toward a blind faith. It's a reiteration of what he told Mary in the garden, that he was back, but not for too long. Remember last week he said, "Do not cling to me, for I am not yet ascended to my Father." Not everyone would have the chance to see Jesus in person, to touch the wounds in his hand and the wound in his side. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples. These signs are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. As we're working through our heartbreak, shock, despair, and wondering in the 1619 Project group, we're doing it together. As we're working through those big feelings, we're also having to shift some. We're having to realize that none of us can fix any of this on our own. We're having to realize that not even our congregation can fix the whole of this broken world. In those realizations, we're having to fight our American individualism, even as we're learning how it has been embedded into our laws and culture for centuries. We're going to have to fight rugged individualism and our own perception that the guilt of our forebears and salvation of our successors falls on our shoulders rather than the wood of the cross. We're out of practice partnering with others to effect change when we're so accustomed to making changes ourselves and being the commanders of our own destinies. That's not where or how the disciples encounter Jesus. It's not thinking a new world into being, not manifesting. It's gathering together and Jesus showing up. As the disciples gathered together to work through their fear, shock, heartbreak, wondering, and despair, Jesus joins them through locked doors and blesses them with peace. From Thomas to the other 11, he shows them his glorious body, and they know for sure that he has been raised from the dead. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe," and invites us to do the same. He invites us to take his most precious body in our hands and experience the miraculous sign of his presence with us in Eucharist, that we would believe. These are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Gathered together and working together, we will see the Lord. Amen.